Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the second day of our conference on the impact of globalization on VET. I see smiley faces. I do not know if this is because of yesterday's wine or you are excited you are back. Show me hands if you're excited to be back, if you're looking forward to the discussions. Show me hands. Good, good. Yeah, some people prefer the wine, actually. All right, so since we are awake, we'll start our second day. The first session has to do with the reporting from yesterday's workshops. The three workshops, where you have discussed in more detail the three topics that we have agreed, let's say. The first reporting will be done by Peter Zofix, the workshop number 1 on globalization changing what we learn. Peter Zofix is the director of the Institute of Banking Education, and he's also a former CEDEFOP colleague. Since 2013, he has been an elected member of the Board of Directors of the European Banking and Financial Services Training Association, as a Vice President of the Association of Adult Education Institutions of Slovakia. Peter, thank you for accepting our invitation to be a rapporteur, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Now it's okay. Can you hear me well? So thank you, George. Yorgos, Kalimera. It's a great pleasure to be here and see former colleagues and also so many new faces. I think we have a very difficult task to complete, because in 10 minutes to cover everything from the workshops, it's quite challenging. It's almost mission impossible. So how will I do it? I will just devote 1 minute for each presentation, and then I will concentrate on the discussions and the questions which we received. The first presentation from Frontex was about the harmonization of border guard education and training at EU level, in accordance with the principles of the Bologna and Copenhagen process. Can you see? Okay. Copenhagen processes. The agency aims to ensure comparability of border guard qualifications across the EU, as well as to develop compatible training programs and EU training modules. The Common Core curriculum was launched in 2007 and represents the first standardized set of skills and knowledge criteria for basic level border guard training in the EU. It was devised and perfected by representatives of member states to bring together best practices and shared goals and values from across Europe. The CCC includes modules representing the full range of border-related topics, from detection of false documents and stolen cars to human rights, international law, and leadership. Frontex also delivers a wide range of courses in all border guard specializations. One of the key concepts introduced by Frontex is the EU sectoral qualifications framework for border guarding, in line with the EQF. The second presentation explained the role of the European Asylum Support Office, an agency of the European Union that plays a major role in the concrete development of common European asylum system and is committed to supporting member states in implementing common protection standards for those in need of international protection. The training curriculum aims at developing a system which is interactive, practical, and based on real case studies. The training curriculum is an excellent example of practical cooperation between member states, and it ensures a common understanding of common European asylum system. The third presentation was about the EEE standard, which is a quality standard for the financial services sector, and it stipulates how a qualification should be designed and executed. It is an accreditation proposal for institutions seeking recognition of the quality of qualifications they provide. EEE standard is reference to the three fundamental EU lifelong learning instruments, the EQF, the ECVET, and ECAVET, and is composed of 3 pillars: the infrastructure, green pillar, the pillar of 10 values, and the blue pillar and the body pillar, a red pillar, all supported by 22 guidelines. Focusing on a qualification as a whole, the EEE standard encourages modularization of qualifications and segmentation of learning outcomes into smaller qualifications to facilitate lifelong learning and flexible accumulation and transfer of qualifications in the EU. The EEE requirements are formulated so as to be flexible enough to allow for the recognition of existing national good practices rather than to enforce strict compliance with rigid stipulations. The fourth presentation focused on the European quality in social services, which is an initiative of the European Platform for Rehabilitation. EQUAS aims to enhance the personal service sector by engaging service providers in quality, continuous improvement, and by guaranteeing quality of services to service users throughout Europe. EQUAS wants to contribute to the creation of the European market and the modernization of personal services of general interest, where service providers can distinguish themselves and use the quality of their service provision as a competitive advantage. A substantial number of social service providers and individuals in more than 12 European countries have shown their important commitment to the EQUAS quality approach by certifying their services or supporting the implementation. The EQUAS certification programs fully comply with the European quality requirements in the social sector as expressed in EQF and ECAVET. So then we had a discussion with our discussant. It was interesting to observe that the first three initiatives were heavily driven by European mandates and regulations. If the mandates and regulations continue to gather pace, more qualifications will emerge this manner. The question, how do national systems and European and global systems talk to each other and work together? Perhaps we need to think about some protocols or mechanisms in place to ensure national and global systems do not work in isolation. If the systems do not connect as a jigsaw, individuals will not be prepared for the future. They need to be able to work nationally, regionally, and also globally. We need to ensure that mandates and regulations do not drive narrow thinking. Workers of the world need to build flexible skills that enable them to transform throughout their careers. Individuals need to learn how to take ownership of their personal learning and upskilling. Self-development is a key aspect of learning alongside technical knowledge and skills. Seeing vocational knowledge as contextual poses a significant challenge to textual representation of knowledge. Important parts of the applied knowledge in the workplace is not documented. This might lead to the question of the suitability of the nature of the term learning outcome in an educational process with the aim of becoming, with the intention to develop an identity as a professional field. The identity of a professional can be seen as the gate to becoming a member of a professional community and to comply with the culture. Globalization influences the needed competencies in a certain field as a function of how the value chain is organized. First question. To what extent do VET systems review their national standards as an explicit response to globalization and internationalization? How does this take place? National systems are often not very flexible and efficient, and there is no standard mechanism to incorporate changes. It takes time to adopt national VET systems, and it is also expensive. In some countries, it is an ongoing process. For example, in Scotland, the case of sectoral skills councils was mentioned. In other countries, it is a longer procedure, even 7 years in Italy. We also have to distinguish between educational and occupational standards. Occupational standards adapt faster. Standards do not change explicitly because of globalization, but because of responsiveness. Cross-border work and mobility requires international standards. There was a consensus that regulation is the strongest driver of change. We had an example of truck drivers who need to comply to common rules. Europe needs to think globally. We have a very regional view. There was a consensus among the group that we have to recognize what is local in the context of sectors. Standards represent the way to assure quality. Second question. How can international knowledge, skills, and competence requirements best be incorporated in national qualifications and curricula? International mobility of workers enables incorporate international knowledge, skills, and competence in national qualifications and curricula, such as in agriculture or hospitality sector. We should not forget about mobility of students, teachers, and trainers. In this occasion, the study visit program was mentioned as a good practice example. We have to distinguish between knowledge, skills, and competence. We should not forget about the needs of companies, and finally, what and how to learn and get the job done. Question number 3. Are European and or international VET standards a way to go? What is required for those to work? The majority agreed that European and global standards, especially in the electricity and gas sectors, will improve national systems. Both national and international standards are needed. There was also a provoking comment that standardization might hurt innovation and change. It would be important to find a common language, common ground, what we exactly mean by standardization, harmonization, transposition, due to different contextual understanding of these terms. Probably we all agree that European standards will support the member states with limited human and financial resources. VET systems must adopt changes and be flexible as fast as market requires. Either you innovate and change or die. Industry should push national authorities and exchange ideas among actors. Involvement of all stakeholders is key to success. Next steps for actions. This was the most difficult part, I guess. More exchange of information between national authorities and sectors is inevitable. We have to better understand the changes in VET standards and what is the role of globalization in this process. There are two approaches to tackle these developments. Top-down approach, as it was presented in the case of Frontex, or bottom-up, as Erasmus program was designed. We need to further review the best practices internationally, and CEDEFOP can take a major role in this process. Thank you very much. I hope I managed the time.
Peter, very well done. It seemed like a Formula One race. But you made it. Thank you. Very comprehensive. We take note of the next steps, and we will come back to it also during the closing session. Are there any questions that you would like to address to Peter? Yes, Brigitte?
Yes, just a technical questions. Why weren't the what was presented not expressed in terms of learning outcomes, but in terms of duration of training? Thank you.
Peter?
Yes, I just used a simple metrics to understand the training programs, what they provide. So there was no time to explain everything in learning outcomes and go into details. Thank you.
So time is a way to explain. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or need for clarifications? Yes, Thomas?
Just a brief question, because I did not understand the very last sentences on the next steps for actions, namely, why do you put welding under bottom-up? I thought that this would be a good example for top-down, because you have European standards and international standards even, which they are then implemented regionally or nationally.
I think first you have to start at the member states, and then they came together and formed an association, and after that they came up with a standard. So it's it goes both ways, I would say.
Great. So then now we move to the next workshop. The next workshop is on international qualifications enabling employability, and the reporting will be done by Tormod Skjerve. Tormod is also a former colleague of mine. He is now a senior policy advisor in the Federation of Norwegian Enterprises, and he represents the Federation in several national committees in the field of skills policy and education and training policy. He is also a member of the ESCO board, the European ECV team, and Eurochamber's People and Skills Committee. Tormod, thank you for accepting our invitation. I'll take care of your presentation.
So, good morning, everybody. 10 minutes snapshots of 3 hours. With 3 brilliant presentations and pretty interesting and lively discussion. So, this is the 3 presentations. The international qualifications in Latvia. It was an example from the national level. A Portuguese presentation that was taking us worldwide, And the third was the French example. It was very different starting points. I will not go into detail in the presentations, but it was very different. For BIBA, the question was, do we need international qualifications? That was the starting point. So they did a survey. They mapped the international qualification in Latvia, and surprisingly, they found international qualification in 9 sectors. So now they have the characteristics, they have the requirements, they have the assessment methods, they have the documentation, they have the potential drawbacks and potential advantages of holding an international qualification in the labor market, but as Baba said, we don't know what to do with them. So that was a very, very nice example how they start at national level. For Margarita, it was the opposite. Indeed, we need international qualifications. So let me explain, because I was expecting at grassroots level, I saw a nice little community in the countryside, but Margarita was taking us on this worldwide journey in all continents, to large companies, to SMEs, in a circle of employers, vet providers, national qualification authorities, certification bodies, and it was standards, and it was standards. And also into 23 main training areas. So I just wonder which areas was outside these 23 main areas. So it was a very, very comprehensive example of international qualification, international standards. In not one sector, it was a lot of sectors for the EESK group in Portugal. So the third one, from do we need to indeed we need to what's the problem with international qualifications? But because in France, they have a long tradition to integrate, to look at international qualifications. So the issue of international qualification is not an issue for us. The sectors decide. That was a message from Brigitte. And us, that's the Commission Nationale de la Certification Professionnelle. So it's not a problem for us. If the sectors want, if the labor market wants, okay, that's fine. And they have a strong tripartite cooperation on the validation of non-formal, informal learning, for example. So international qualification are not only for people on the move. That was a strong point. And that brings us to the first of the 3 questions. And the question was about position and perception. What's the position of international sectoral qualification in the labor market? The perception of employers and national authorities, does this vary from sector to sector? Which are reasons for that? So we see, international qualification is not only for mobility. They are for excellence nationally also. And it's an issue that's on the national agenda in almost every country. It's different perspectives and it's different needs according to employers and to national authorities. For employers, for example, innovation, competitiveness. For national authorities, more concerned about legislation and broad qualifications. So it's different perspectives on the qualifications. But it's significant correlation between international exposure and attention to international qualifications in countries and in sectors. So it's a kind of a differentiation between countries and sectors regarding the international exposure. And we also have to differentiate between the labor markets. Are we talking about the regulated labor market? Are we talking about the open labor market that adapt almost every qualification if the level is right? Or are we into the more company training, the internal labor market? We find the international qualification in all these different labor markets, but they play a different role. So, what's the added value? What added value do international qualifications bring to employers, national authorities, workers, and students? Do they have any limitations? Which ones? So standards don't communicate, was the message from Margarita. So they don't communicate cross-border, cross-language. That's the need of international standards. But we have to link standards to qualifications. And that's for the next question and the next slide concerning the quality. But that's the main issue. Youth employment, productivity, better product, some of the key points popping up when we talk about added value. It's about evolution of qualifications. It's added value as part of national qualifications. An example was in green skills, adding to existing skills at the national level. It's about reputation, career progression for workers. And it's different added value for students in VET and workers in CVET. So that we also have to differentiate. And it's about content and it's about learning outcomes. That brings us to the third question of the quality criteria for institutions and bodies providing training, assessing, and awarding international qualifications. The linking of standards and qualification is a quality issue because of different scopes. It's a narrow scope, broad scope. So that's one of the main issues talking about the quality of the qualifications. We also talk about the common language. Is learning outcomes a common language? We talk about qualified trainers. We talked about the internet, the problem, challenge of fake qualification, how to separate good and bad, how to select between qualifications. That's about quality. And then we come to the consumer protection, information, transparency, recognition, and also the word of transferability. And just to remind, that was Wilfred that reminds us about that accreditation concerns three different elements: training, assessment, and awarding. And sometimes it's only one of the elements, sometimes two, sometimes three. So we have to be aware, is the accreditation for all three, or is it only for one of these elements? Next steps. To identify sectors exposed for global competition. Because, as we saw from the previous slide, that's bringing us into the most important sectors to work with the globalization and the internationalization of qualifications. We need to set up pilots, set up partnerships, enhance a dialogue. We need to elaborate on common quality criteria, to explore the currency perspective, to work on changeability, to look into economical aspects. That's quite interesting. It was touched by everybody, I think, the economical aspects of international qualifications. And we need to look into the limitation, obsolescence, sustainability, and so on, and to look into the complementarity. What are significant similarities and differences between national and international qualifications? That's I think, important for the structure of the discussion to look into this question. And to be more systematic, and that may be a task for CEDEFOP, to systematically, what are the lessons learned? Thank you. That was almost 10 minutes.
Tormod, thank you for your summary. Very enlightening. What I keep from that is that you confirm that it's an issue on the national agenda of almost all countries, as you have said, but countries are at different pace. So this links very much to what you said also at the end on CEDEFOP's role, and we will persist and keep on following those issues so that we provide the evidence for the different actors to be well informed. Any questions or clarifications? Yes.
Good morning. While listening to the presentation and to the summary, I was wondering, everything that you presented makes sense from a supply perspective. But when we look at companies, you alluded to sometimes micro elements like companies. Did you consider anything to add demand criteria to the qualification as well as to the standards that are being discussed? Because if the companies don't clarify what they need, the supply might be going in the wrong direction. Thank you.
It might be that I take it for granted because I'm representing the Employers' Federation. So my perspective is always from the company side. So I didn't stress it. Yeah. But of course, when we talk about the different labor markets, we talk about the need of standards. It was from the company side. It was from the enterprise side. That why we need this internationalization of standards and to bring international qualification into the national qualifications to try to merge. And that was the first point. And the second point is the learning outcomes. That's also to have a common language from the perspective of the employers that needs to elaborate more on the learning outcomes, the information given by the learning outcomes. So I think that might be a key point for the quality of this kind of qualification, to use a common standard on learning outcomes, how to communicate the outcomes of the qualifications. That's a couple of examples, but a good point.
Thank you, Tormod. Are there any other questions in relation to the outcomes of workshop number 2? No. So we go on with workshop number 3, which focuses on the actors for better employability, for renewing VET and taking into consideration the global requirements. Birute Miskiniene is the rapporteur for this workshop. Birute is the director of International Business School of Vilnius University. She is also Deputy Director of Higher Education and Innovation in the Ministry of Education and Science. She was a director of Leonardo da Vinci program for many years and contact persons for CEDEFOP study visits, since we've heard about study visits. And she's also a member of the EU Task Force of International Project Management Association. Birute, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to present the outcomes of workshop number 2. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. It is my high pleasure to be here after some years and see many familiar faces. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to present a very diverse landscape of opinions and experiences coming from our group. First of all, as all the groups, we also had the 3 very interesting presentations coming from different sectors and covering the different aspects. But I have been integrated all those presentations in my report. First of all, we have been talking about the benefits for the systems with the joint forces for individuals and how the national standards to be responded to the global requirements. And talking about the benefits, we have discovered that probably the benefits should be or might be changed to the wording like value creation. And so it was our proposition in our group. And first of all, what kind of benefit or value do we see? That's avoidance of fragmentation of EU level, and globally recognized skilled workforce. That's very important, and as one of the cases has been presented coming from the sport industry, we already have the global standards for the fitness industry. It was the Ben's presentation. So it was quite nice to hear that such kind of things are happening. And of course, we see the benefit for trust and value creation for all stakeholders to be involved in this process. And as we have been talking yesterday during the panel presentation, the mobility of the labor force, and the labor force is becoming more and more global. So it means that it could be also supported and done those better labor mobility. Another thing which was mentioned by our participants of the group, that's the common strategy, which also leads the transparency issues, and also the co-ownership was quite broadly discussed, because if we are going to take the co-ownership, so it means that we are going to achieve the better results, and shared responsibility is already on the place. And also the common interest of public good and industry need has been mentioned very, very often. And there's some feelings, also the sense of feeling to belong to qualification. So that's quite, let's say, the sensitive, but it was important. And I think that we have been discussing a lot the better vet teacher preparation. So we see that this co-ownership and working together, it can contribute to better vet teachers preparation, which is very important. As we see the vet teacher, one of the main value creators in this process. The second question was how cooperation of all actors from different levels could be organized, and what is responsibility of education and training providers and other stakeholders or users. And we have made an agreement, almost everyone in our group, that education systems need to be more quick and more flexible, just to better respond to labor market demand or needs. And we have been discussing also about the matters of the real cooperation, not only the label cooperation. We have quite a number of different institutions and different committees, but really not all the time they are productive or effective as we would like them to be. Here we had a bit disagreement, not disagreement, but different opinions by discussing the different levels, because some groups, they said that, well, we should have the real bodies with the real mandates, with the real power, with the real encouragement. And the other opinion was that we should leave this on the program level, because it is much more quick cooperation could be done on this level, not going through the national authorities' decisions and all those things. Another presentation which was very interesting from Netherlands, that's the EC-VET pilots in Netherlands, that the project was dedicated for the continuing education involving the adult people into their continuing education by organizing and providing tailor-made programs and or company specifics. And we see that the huge need is coming for such kind of the programs. And this presentation, which was made by Regina, it was quite an evident that the success was there. And of course, as I already was mentioning, the co-ownership and shared responsibility. And another one thing that it was discussed, that shared funding, as we had case coming from Nestle, Alberto has been presenting the very interesting initiative, the Nestle initiative, which became the European Wild Initiative coming from Nestle experience. So the shared funds and the companies' involvement into the program design. And really in Spain, the dual vet system is not so well developed. And we had a very good example coming from the company perspective, showing how the dual vet system could contribute and work. And of course, shared arenas and findings should be for all partners. So it means that by sharing responsibility, by sharing ownership, we can get much more benefits from partners involved. The third question, how can EU tools and programs and resources could be better used? So we see the benefit or value which already has been discussed in the previous groups, that the EQF, ECVET, that's the common language we can speak. So that's very good contribution, of course. And also the space arena for better collaboration. So on this issue we have agreed all of us. And also by seeing the good examples coming from the EU initiatives, programs and perspectives, we can say that the setting cooperation through EU projects where cooperation does not exist. So it means that we can expand the space or professional arena for that. And of course the vet teachers. We have been considering ourselves that we are caring about the vet teachers, and vet teachers training and involvement in EU initiatives could be better, we see that. And we had the people coming from different areas. That's the real added value. For instance, we have the person coming from the space agency, and the space agency indication was that we have a lot of materials produced at EU level, but there is not so good contribution. The material does not reach the people they could be interested. So, and of course the next steps, sorry, I'm not taking the steps you have been providing for me there. I'm talking about one group with a beer and dinner, but it was actual for yesterday. So next steps for actions. Again, the teachers training in global cooperation arena. So that's very important. Replication of good practices or experiences. Promoting vet mobility outside EU. So personally, I would like to support CEDEFOP study visits by having the chance, because I was working, and I think that this program was a very valuable program for the beneficiaries. And the proposal also, this conference demonstrates that we should concentrate not only on the European arena, but the global arenas. And one of the colleagues yesterday told me that I was thinking about all those three answers raised for us, and I got all the answers myself, but then I came to this conference, I got completely different answers. So it means that contribution and the sharing experiences here is very valuable. And of course the better dissemination of existing tools. So that's, and the last but not least, so thank you very much for cooperation. I am talking about my group and about all participants of the conference and the global arena given for us. So thank you very much.
Well done, Birute. Thank you very much for your presentation. I take some of the steps that you have identified, the need to fill the gap between what happens at European level and informing, let's say, the national actors. And I understand there are different ways that things can happen within the country, so we need to be very well aware of those differences. Are there any questions to be addressed to Birute in relation to the outcomes of the discussions? No? So, great. We move on straight away to the next session. The next session, we will open up and see what happens in other parts of the world. We have very interesting presentations, 4 presentations from UNESCO, Australia, New Zealand, and India. And what I would like to ask you is, while listening to those presentations, try to identify yourselves in the challenges and the questions that these countries, for example, try to address. And secondly, if you see that any of those solutions can work, already are working in your country, it would be good to refer to it and see any similarities and differences. So the first presentation is by Boren Chakroun. Boren is head of section in his charge of Tibet at UNESCO, and he is leading the implementation of the UNESCO Tibet strategy adopted in 2009. His most recent work focuses on global trends in reforming Tibet and qualification systems, and he's been working in the past also with the EU, the World Bank, and other international organizations. Boren, the floor is yours.
Thank you, George. Good morning. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you again for our CDFOP colleagues and friends to invite UNESCO to participate in the discussion here. I would like to, George has been insisting that we have to be short, stick to 15 minutes, so I will do my best. But then I would like to give the takeaways before I come to the presentation, so that I'm sure that I would say what I would like to say. First of all, I think that while the discussion has been more on qualifications and international qualification, maybe internationalization of qualification, I think that globalization of that is more than that. And I would like to mention 3 things. First of all, the first element that we might consider as element of the globalization is the international agenda on development and education, and that, I think, will influence the way that will develop in the future. So one factor will be the global agenda. The second factor is the global market, global vet market. And I think here we have to take into consideration the supply and the demand, the information, the regulation of the market, but also the imperfection of the market. And this is an important aspect that I would like to come back to it. The third is about, of course, the qualifications, the mobility of people, mobility of jobs, but also mobility of services. And I think this is an important element to consider. Another point that I have heard also from the presentation this morning is that global issues cannot be resolved at one continent. They have to be resolved at a global level. So with all the discussion that is happening in Europe, and it's very important, I don't think that the global issues will be resolved by a Eurocentric solution. So it has to be a global solution. And I will finish by what UNESCO is trying to do in this complex situation. And my title is illustrative of this. The debate is about public goods, it's about private goods, but it's also a possibility to have a common good. And I hope we, through this conference and through the debate, we can come up and advance this agenda. So first of all, I think it's important that in our debate, we place the debate of the globalization of that in the new agenda that has been adopted by the UN end of September by the head of states on the new sustainable development goals. And we are heading in almost a few days with the COP21 in Paris with an important, hopefully, agreement regarding the transition and the climate change, to address the climate change. So these are important aspects where that qualification, the debate on education and training will have to be framed. And it's very important to consider that we have around 17 sustainable development goals that are influencing the debate around education and training, about the markets, about the priorities, and of course about the shifting resources and where the resources will go. So if I take issues like health, issues like energy, renewable energy, climate actions, education, those are important agenda for all of us, and they're important agenda for the global debate, but they will influence the qualification, they will influence vocational education and training, and influence the way we think about vocational education and training in a global agenda. Within this sustainable development agenda, the education is a very important goal, and we at UNESCO think that the education goal is the key for the other goals, and without progress in education and training, most probably we will not be able to achieve the other goals. And the overarching goal for the Sustainable Development Agenda is to ensure that we have equitable and inclusive quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all by 2030. This is very ambitious and I would say even aspirational goal. But the debate on globalization of that has to take this into consideration, what we are trying to do to achieve this. And I like the title of Jane on how to serve the New Zealand citizens. So it's very important how we are serving lifelong learning opportunities for all, and that globalization has to serve this objective as well. Within this overarching goal, there is an important aspect on more human right, I would say, perspective. How to ensure that people have the right to education, have the right to skills, have the right to qualifications. And I think that this human right dimension has to be important. The issue of inclusion and equity as well. We know that many people are not accessing to skills and qualifications, or that they are discriminated. We have examples of cases where people are not allowed to acquire qualification, or their qualifications are not recognized, or there isn't a fair process for recognizing their skills. So this is an important element of our debate, I would say, on globalization of that. In the global agenda, vocational skills is at the center stage. We have 3 targets that are around vocational skills. One is about access, how to ensure that people who who need skills and qualification will have access to vocational education and training, to qualification, to recognition of their skills, and to the recognition of qualification. So there is one dimension on access. But the other dimension is about outcomes, meaning it's not only the learning outcomes, but it's the outcomes in the labor market. How qualification can ensure better and decent work, how it can ensure better wages, a progression in the career. So the issue of our labor market outcome is as well important. And the last aspect is about how we are eliminating disparities. Including on gender, for example, where vocational education and training, the enrollment rates in vocational education and training are less for girls than boys, but in particular that in many countries girls and women are put in trades or specialization that are not bringing better outcome in the labor market. So this is an important dimension of the agenda. So this is, I would say, the element of a public good, if I can say so, where it's about rights, it's about governments engaging and setting agenda, ambition agenda, and even aspirational agenda to progress on the globalization of education, of that in particular. But there is an important aspect that I think we have to consider, is that, unfortunately, the enrollment in vocational education and training is rather low, so the pipeline is dry. And if you look at the statistics, in some countries and some regions, it's even decreasing. For example, in Africa, but also in Arab states, as well in Europe, where it is rather constant. So the question is about which qualification, which VET qualification are we talking about? Which VET are we talking about? And in reality, if we take the overall, the global statistics, we are talking about 50 million person. But 50 million person, that's nothing compared to, for example, what India want to do with 500 million persons to be skilled. I don't talk about other countries. So the question is, are we having the numbers that we think are sufficient and relevant? Are we promoting vocational education and training? And then maybe the question is also, shall we continue focusing only on upper secondary qualifications or think about other qualifications? Qualifications that are acquired through the workplace, qualification on post-secondary, and other forms of non-formal, for example, training and qualification. So I think the question on upper secondary maybe is a bit misleading in the debate about the importance and the globalization of that. And I'm very happy that we have here banking, we have different sectors that are most probably very active in promoting their own qualification, and the question on international qualification is important. There are different drivers for, I talked about the public good. I would like to move to the element of private good and just mentioned international actors, international qualification. There is something that we have to consider is that the World Trade Organization consider education and training as a service. And that means that we are already considering globalized VET as part of the market. And I think this is very important. There is an increasing dimension of what is called training as service, meaning services related to training and that are accepted across regions and across countries. So we are de facto in a globalized market on that, and we have to recognize that. It is de facto because it is part of the World Trade Organization debate, but it's de facto because of the services and the mobility of services across regions. So this is an important aspect, I believe, in our debate. Let me give an example and to be more concrete. If I take the online training market, and this is a very important market that is growing. If you take, there is a model, maybe some of you know this, called a freemium model, where basically you offer services for free, and then you add services for fees. So basically, you enter the market and you give some services, maybe something like LinkedIn, you are connected, but then you can get services for or premium. So you have to pay for the services. So qualification can be as well in a market where you offer service, but then you can create more value from that. So this is we have intermediation services. For example, in France, there is a startup that is trying to match the demand for training and the offer for training on like a model of last-minute offer. So we are already in a market of training where qualification as well can be in a supply and demand perspective. So this is very important, I would say, in terms of the market dimension and private good, or VET as a private good. Maybe the point is then to move toward a common good and how to make VET a common good. And I think that this type of platform is one that can drive the common good dimension. I would like to move to what we are trying to do at UNESCO on this. Just one thing is that if we look at, and I will show two slides just to show the global dimension of what we are talking about. This is a map of the world about the economic integration. I will not go into the details, but where there are colors, these are markets that are trying to be integrated for mobility of services, production, and people as well. And this is about the regulations or agreement that allows people to move, with different layers, of course, and different levels of regulation. But the color shows how much people can move across within the region or across regions. So we are already in globalized integrated economic market, and we are already in area where people can move with different regulation, as I said, with different issues. We are also in a situation where the landscape is moving on developing a national qualification framework, regional qualification framework. We have a process of regional qualification framework in Southern African Development Community, in ASEAN, Europe, the Caribbean, there is a transnational qualification framework. The Gulf countries are developing regional qualification framework. The Pacific, the Western Africa, sorry, the Central American qualification framework. So we are already in a landscape where qualification framework and regional qualification framework are taking shape. The process, the tempo is not the same, but we have a landscape that is already growing in terms of trying to ensure that the qualifications are linked. The international dimension of qualification is confirmed as an important characteristic of any endeavor related to qualification. So I think this is an important aspect that we have to recognize. And within UNESCO, we have a range of regional conventions on higher education that have been adopted and revised, and they are in the process of revision, which allows mobility of students in particular. So I said, and I would like to finish with what we are trying to do. I said earlier that global solution are important for global challenges. I think that we need a common language, an approach to the use of learning outcomes across borders. We need to understand what we are trying to do when we are expressing learning outcomes, when we are assessing, when we are recognizing. And we don't need one language at the end, but we need a common language so that we can understand each other and understand different, our work in different regions. We need as well an internationally shared hierarchy of levels. It's not necessarily one hierarchy, but we need to understand, we need to have a common metrics so that we can understand each other, and we can refer to the international metrics. We need international legitimacy and credibility, and obviously that can be driven by international platform. We need to strengthen methodology, and these are expert work that have to come together to understand the specificities of each region and how to make advance in this area. So we need global solution for the discussion that we are having that we had yesterday and today. And for this, we think that the important or the process that have to be taken is rather bottom-up approach, meaning trying to get the different stakeholders together to understand what they are doing, identify gaps and needs of a broad range of stakeholders. It's not only government stakeholders or qualification authority or regional qualification, but it's also private stakeholders. It's also civil society stakeholders that can be involved in the debate. And setting opportunities for the leaders and actors to engage with each other across regions so that we understand what is happening in different regions, but also we grow together in this area. And work on developing common tools and guidelines. So for this, and I'm finishing with what we are trying to do. We got a recommendation from the Third International Congress to develop international guidelines for the recognition of qualification and the development of quality assurance guidelines. So for the recognition of qualification, we are studying the opportunity to develop these guidelines. And for this, we are trying to see what's the purpose of these guidelines, how we can work together. And we see that it can strengthen recognition, methodologies, tools, and to countries, regions to be intelligent users of this. We see how we can work together to use the learning outcomes. We would like to look at the application of this, but not necessarily using a normative approach, but more, I would say, a bottom-up approach, as I said earlier, to work together on this. We would like to put this in lifelong learning perspective, meaning that the qualification have to increase employability, but also increase the possibilities for people to continue learning in their career. Have a common and broad definition that can help us understand each other and work together. And for this, I think what we are trying to do is to, in a way, try to deal with the tension that I mentioned earlier. We have more public good processes where we have qualification authorities, regional qualifications, referencing processes that are important. But we have also international qualification, we have international stakeholders, we have a market that is moving, and it's moving even sometimes faster than the public good processes. So what we need is towards a common good where the private and the market dynamic can bring value to the qualifications and institutionalizing dynamic, but while the institutionalizing dynamic can bring better quality assurance, better trust, and value of the qualifications that are required through the private dynamic. This is what I would say a common good and common approach to our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beren. Very interesting presentation. You said very well the context within which VET works in the different continents and how that links to what we will hear from the other speakers. Our next speaker is Melissa McEwen. Melissa works as a branch manager in the Skills Market Group of the Australian Government Department of Education and Training. And she works with qualifications benchmarking, occupational standards development. She will tell us more about what they do and how they do it in her presentation. Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's great. Is my microphone? Yeah. It's great to be here. No, wrong one. It's great to be here and to have a chance to share some of the work that we're doing with a European audience. Most of what we do has been focused on Asia and the APEC region, and to a small extent Latin America. So it's great, and I think there are a lot of themes that have come up over the last day or so, and especially this morning. They're quite relevant to the kind of work that we're doing. What we've found in the past few years is that there's an enormous interest in how, from our region particularly, in how Australia does vocational education and training. And I probably don't need to go into much detail about why, but what we're finding is that a number of countries in the Asia-Pacific region are really just working out that they need to do something about their vocational education sectors. Largely, they have academic-driven sectors. They're not as industry-engaged as Australia or most of Europe would be, and they're trying to find ways to avoid getting stuck in the middle-income trap. And they recognise that skills is going to be an important part of that. We in Australia have a significant interest in engaging through vocational education. Education exports, for a start, are a significant part of the Australian economy. They are our third largest export sector after coal and iron ore. So for Australia, education's export services are really important, and we're interested in finding out how we can improve that. We also, for the Australian government, economic diplomacy is an incredibly important part of our international agenda. We recognise that what benefits our region, what benefits our regional partners, will benefit us both economically and in terms of regional stability. We also know that an increasing number of Australian companies are working internationally, and international companies are working in Australia. And for them, understanding the pool of skills that is available to them is really important. It helps to support international investment. So again, this is part of what we are thinking about in terms of the approach that we've been taking in the skills market. So where we've come from over the past couple of years is some intensive thinking about how do we engage best? How do we make what we're doing in the skills space work for us, work for the partners. We're very conscious that we don't want to act like some kind of colonial entity who comes in and tells everyone this is the best thing you must do. We know the Australian system is very much based on the idea of what's appropriate for Australia. So sometimes what's appropriate in Australia isn't appropriate in other countries. And therefore, we're trying to work on a principles base. We're trying to find methods of sharing what we do in a way that can assist other countries, help them, and also, hopefully, have a mutual benefit for Australia as well. So what I'm going to talk about today are three examples of some of the international approaches that we have been taking. The first is our transport and logistics occupational standards. This was a project that we've undertaken through APEC, and it's essentially around benchmarking and developing occupational standards. We've undertaken a few benchmarking exercises where we've tried to compare Australian qualifications to qualifications in other countries. What we find, that's a very complex process, because particularly you get lost in the detail. When people start looking at the detail of one qualification versus the detail of an Australian qualification, it's very hard to get up out of, well, these aren't quite the same, we describe things differently, and so forth. So we decided to come at it from a different angle, and that was looking at the co-development of what are the basics of the occupations. Essentially, we chose transport and logistics because of the importance within, an internationalised global chain, and we've seen a couple of slides yesterday that talk about in the Nestle process, or Nutella, Nutella, there are products from 16 different countries. Most manufactured goods have inputs from at least 12 different economies, which means that the speed and efficiency of transport and logistics is incredibly important. In our project, what we did was we partnered with 4 different countries. We used both a government partner and also an industry-based partner, and that was really important in driving the process. We went through a process of co-development. We brought everyone to Australia. We worked together on what were the occupations that we wanted to look at, what were the elements of it, how did you describe it. Through each country went away and validated the standards themselves that we were developed, and came back again, and we met in Manila 2 months ago, and essentially agreed 45 individual occupational standards and were validated them. What we did was we looked at core and elective parts of those occupations. What we found was, for a number of countries would say, absolutely, this is a core part of our of the job within our country. Some countries said it wasn't. We then said, well, it's not compulsory. We don't need to be exactly the same in every country. But what you can do is say, you have these available to you. How you put them together is within a qualification context is your own business. But what we can say is that the core approach of these qualifications is comparable. We know that people educate who use these occupational standards as the basis, who are trained in any of the 5 countries involved in the project, will have comparable skills which can be used in the other 5 countries. What we're looking to do now is to extend this project. Thailand and Malaysia have both expressed interest in comparing their current occupational qualifications with the occupational standards. And we're also going to be working with Pacific Alliance countries in South and Central America to further validate what we've done in these occupational standards. And what we ends up in doing is having some core approaches to transport and logistics standards. So that we found that this has been really successful. It's particularly successful, we found, in the both the Chinese and Indonesian federations now are very keen to translate this into training for them. And they've come to Australia to talk to some of our training providers about how they can provide ongoing training, how this can be translated from an outline of kind of what the outcome of your training needs to be, the learning outcomes, into actual training standards and approaches. The second aspect that I want to talk about is something that is a little bit ambitious, but also follows on a bit with the work that was being talked about in the UNESCO space, and that's around how do we have an integrated approach to understanding other people's qualifications. When it comes to labour mobility, qualifications framework referencing is useful, but it's not the solution. It is great to understand what levels qualifications add at, but for us that's only a part of the picture. There are a couple of other parts of the picture that are really important from our point of view. We find that skills recognition, particularly within our region, is still a significant barrier to labour mobility. At the same time, understanding the skills and that are available in another country is an important part of confidence in business investment. This project was conceptualised from our experience of the challenges associated with skills recognition internationally. One of my previous responsibilities has been to manage Trades Recognition Australia, who undertake skills assessments for migration purposes. So we've thought a lot and have quite a deep understanding of some of those challenges in recognition. One of the biggest problems is in recognition is understanding also what other people are what the content is. So when we look at the process, we think that there are three key elements to any recognition. The first is relevance. Relevance is about making sure that what people are learning is the same wherever they're learning it. The second is level, which is the traditional qualifications referencing framework approach. And the third is quality. We've spoken a lot about quality assurance and the need for rigorous quality assurance. And being assured that the quality of delivery in another country, I mean, referencing frameworks is all very well, but how do you know that quality is being maintained? So what we're hoping to piece together is we want to leverage off work that's already been done. There, as was just described, there are quite a lot of referencing frameworks and qualification systems being developed. We don't think that APEC needs its own qualifications referencing framework, and we want to leverage off the work of the ASEAN referencing framework. We're also interested in, the work has been done in the East Asia Summit space on a quality assurance referencing framework. And finally, the new part of it that we're developing, the new piece of the puzzle, is the occupational standards referencing framework. And what we want to do is use the work that we've undertaken in the transport and logistics space as a methodology which will be a basis for how we work with an occupational standards referencing framework. And we're looking to have that in place. We'll have the first stages of that developed by the end of this year, and then to report to APEC next year about progress and adoption. The final part that I will talk about briefly is looking at international courses, and in particular an international training and assessment course. Again, what we've discovered is people come to Australia and they say, oh, we really want your Australian certificate in training and assessment delivered here in India, China, etc. The problem is that the Australian qualification is developed specifically for Australia. To do that qualification, you have to do units, compulsory units on the Australian qualifications framework, on Australian training packages. That's not relevant if you are never going to be teaching Australian qualifications. If you are going to be teaching Indian qualifications in India, You do not need to know all of that kind of information. It makes the course much more expensive, it makes it lengthier, and it makes it harder for people to undertake in countries where this is just not relevant. So what we're trying to do in the international course space, though, is to take the strengths of the Australian system in terms of what we have developed, what our qualifications show, and to put them into a more international context. What the idea is that they are to be designed around core technical skills that are valued by industry in multiple countries. So similar to the benchmarking work, but more with the aim in mind that we can develop something that then can be delivered by Australian training providers. Another area where we've had lots of people of international interest has been in our electrical courses. The problem from a regulatory point of view is that you cannot deliver an Australian course, an Australian electrical course in a different country because they don't have Australian wiring rules, Australian standards. However, our courses have very strong, great strengths in terms of their technical and the knowledge behind them. So we want to translate that into an international aspect. We want to make sure that these courses have an ability to meet local demands, but they also maintain some level of quality assurance. The first cab off the rank is our international training and assessment courses. So we've worked with government, we've worked with training providers, we've worked with industry and also the training industry to develop a set of courses that are for assessors, one for trainers and one for advanced trainers, which also involves curriculum development. We have done these based on the Australian qualification, but we found it was a more complex approach than just trying to de-Australianise the Australian qualifications. So we've sort of worked more significantly to transform them. At the moment, they are being piloted in India. India has been a particular challenge for Australia because there's a massive demand in India for training. There's a lot of interest in the Australian system, but the price point of Australian courses and Australian qualifications being delivered in India is about 10 times what the Indians were willing to pay for these courses. So we needed to try and find a way to bring that price down, but without compromising on quality. So these courses are one-way approach to do it, and this is one of the things that we've been looking at. The pilot, the first process went quite well. We've got some very valuable learnings from what has been undertaken, and we're hoping that we'll be able to translate those into into improving the courses so that we can more generally release them to be licensed by Australian training providers. In summary, and I'm happy to talk to anyone about some of this work in more detail, what we have to recognise is that in training provision internationally, even where the core technical skills of a qualification or of something are the same, one size does not fit all. We need to be able to do something better. The Australian products and Australian qualifications are ideal for Australia, but they're not ideal for everyone. We need to balance flexibility and portability, but we also want to make sure that there's quality in delivery. Price, scalability are important when you're talking about delivery internationally. And what we also want to be able to do is look at how we also take the learnings that we have from international engagement and include them back into our own training agendas. Thank you.
Great, Melissa, thank you. I think there is time for a pause. I'd like to give the opportunity to the audience to address some questions both to Boren and to Melissa, before we proceed with another two presentations. These were very interesting presentations, both of them, so hopefully some people would have some reactions. Would you like to address any questions to any of those two speakers? Did you reflect on any similarities or differences? Yes, please. We have Latvia. Baiba.
I have a question to our UNESCO colleague. I really appreciate UNESCO activity as the global convention for recognition, which is initiated and started to participate to prepare. And my question is how you think this global convention can also help in the globalization of VET as part of VET qualifications, as also in higher education level. Thanks.
Before we give the floor to Boren, are there any other questions? Maybe we can deal with them in batches of two. No? Boren, the floor is yours.
That's really the right question, because in reality the higher education regional conventions have been focusing more on academic studies and diploma and qualifications, while our focus, at least in this arena or in this area, is about the vocational and other forms of qualification. And what we are trying to do, the work on the global recognition of qualifications is trying to talk to the process that we engaged on, the work on the world reference levels. Because the work on world reference levels, and that I presented earlier, is a lifelong learning one. It's not focusing only on vocational qualification. We are trying to be as comprehensive and as overarching as possible. And we think that there is a lot of connections between the two processes. But it's not an easy connection, to be very clear about it. We started the last meeting we had of the regional organization working on qualification framework, or regional qualification framework, took place in end of April, and we had a joint meeting with the team working on the Global Convention on Higher Education. So we hope that these two processes will go hand in hand. But there are a lot of challenges in making shift from the focus only on academic qualification to vocational qualifications, and this is a work in progress. And I hope that we will have solutions by bringing other stakeholders, like the ones that we are having around the table here, from the private sector, from other stakeholders who will focus more on the relevance and the demand, and not only the supply of courses, training, and qualifications.
Thank you, Boren. That also creates links with the panel discussion we will have later on the fact that we need to join forces in order to progress. Are there any other questions? No? So then it's time to proceed with the next presentation, Jane von Dandelgen. I hope I pronounced it well, Jane. Jane is a Deputy Chief Executive in Quality Assurance. What she works on is on making rules in regard to qualifications, programs and training schemes, registering private training establishments, accrediting university tertiary education, and also administering the New Zealand qualifications framework. So we will hear more in detail of how your work relates to our topic. There you go.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Jane von Dandelgen tōku ingoa. I'm Jane von Dandelgen. I'm from New Zealand Qualifications Authority, and I've just introduced myself in Maori because that's what we do. So I'm going to talk about some work we're doing in New Zealand about meeting the future needs of New Zealand learners, but also global learners who connect with our system. So we're doing a lot of work on qualifying for the future world. In fact, it is now the message of our organisation in everything we do. And this is about anticipating future needs and changing the way we work in order to meet those needs. So the future learners will have quite different expectations, we think, from those that we are traditionally working with. They will want to choose what they learn, and they want to have their learning portable. They will want to take it with them where they go. And New Zealand's population is very mobile. We have a quarter of our population born outside New Zealand, and a very large number of people who work in other countries at least some of the time. So we also need to make sure that our future meets the needs, the digital needs, and that digital assessment is central to the work we do. And as an organisation, we're also responsible for school leaving qualifications, and these will be available digitally from 2020. I'm going to concentrate on what we in New Zealand call the tertiary sector, which is anything post-secondary school. So tertiary in New Zealand includes vocational education and general education and adult education and literacy and numeracy for adults as well. So it includes everything that is outside formal schooling. And we know that we're going to need much more flexible options for people to meet their needs in that way. We also know that people will need to be able to move globally. And the map above you is all the activity we have going at the moment around international recognition of our qualifications framework and its associated quality assurance in the international sphere. And clearly of great importance to us is the engagement we've had with the EQF in the last 18 months. And that is a central element of it. But there are a number of other activities, particularly in Southeast Asia, and arrangements that we've made around secondary school qualifications as well. So we have some goals and objectives for quality learning in the borderless world, and we see the future that our learners will have becoming increasingly borderless. And we have projects that are about much stronger credit recognition and transfer, and also recording learning in such a way that people can take an authenticated record of their learning with them. We already have an authenticated record of learning for school leaving qualifications and other standard-based national certificates and diplomas, but it doesn't extend to the rest of our framework at this stage. We are extending it to the rest of the framework, and ultimately we also want to be able to include transnational qualifications on it. So our role at the moment is to continue to deliver on an improved present. We have huge demand for our role. We regulate the sector for everybody except universities, and it's important we continue to do that, while creating the environment that makes for the future, a transformed future. So at the heart of that, our quality assurance system and our framework need to become more flexible and at the same time more rigorous. We fully understand that learners want the surety that when something is on our framework and is quality assured, that it is what it says it is, and it can be used and is durable. A strong investment is made in learning, both from public resources and private, and time, and it's very important that the quality is maintained, and that's at the heart of our framework. So New Zealand's had a qualifications framework for nearly 25 years. We're one of the originals along with Scotland. So the system is very well established, and it's been associated with our organisation, NZQA, for that entire period. So the quality assurance that goes with it has also been part of it. This means that we have a framework that actually people commit fraud claiming to have things on our framework or to be quality assured by us, and we end up taking court action for it. That isn't very common in a lot of other quality assurance systems, but because it's so well known in New Zealand, that is something that people do. The framework is an outcomes framework, and it also has elements of recognising Indigenous knowledge. And I'm going to talk a bit more about the framework and our quality assurance system and how they work together. And then I'm going to talk about how we're incorporating transnational qualifications in the process. So we have a 10-level framework. It is very similar to the Australian framework. It's very similar to a number of other frameworks. It starts, level 1 starts with the qualification that school leavers, well, secondary students get at about the age of 15. And there are 3 school leaving qualifications. Level 2 on our framework includes some of the lower level vocational qualifications, the simpler ones, and most of the other vocational qualifications are at level 3 and 4 on our framework. Level 5 and 6 are more advanced vocational qualifications, diplomas, specialised qualifications. Degrees start at level 7, and we have vocationally focused degrees as well as more academic focused degrees. We do not in our framework make the distinction between vocational, academic and general education. All of those are incorporated at different levels on the framework. The size of qualifications is distinct from the level, and all the qualifications on our framework have to be quality assured, and in the case of our framework it's either by NZQA ourselves, which is the case for most qualifications and all vocational ones, or by Universities New Zealand, who perform this function for the 8 universities in New Zealand. But we have degrees right up to doctorates outside the university sector, and NZQA quality assures those. It's just if they're within universities, they're quality assured by Universities New Zealand. All qualifications on our framework are described by a qualification type. So this is certificates, diplomas, degrees, and we have graduate certificates and diplomas and postgraduate certificates and diplomas as well. We have a relatively simple list of titles. Also, everything on our framework has a credit value, and at the time of quality assurance, the credit value level and subject area are defined. So we have a credit system which is actually the same as Scotland's and a number of others, where 1 credit equals 10 hours, 10 notional hours of learning. An average student doing a year of study would do 120 credits. The credit system applies throughout the framework. So the same credit system exactly applies everywhere in universities and in the rest of the framework. This credit system has been with us again since the beginning of our framework. And the framework is designed to meet identified needs of a relevant sector, and we've had a big review over the last 5 years, refocusing all our qualifications below degree level into what are now called New Zealand qualifications. And these qualifications are strongly defined by the learning outcomes sought, the graduate profile sought by end users. In most cases that's employers. In some cases there are community end users who've also been party to that. And the qualifications are now framed very strongly in terms of the graduate profile of the whole qualification, rather than so focused on the component parts as some of them were previously, which is quite a big shift. And quite an important change for us in getting the qualifications relevant, and also reducing the number and size of some of these qualifications so that they focus much more strongly on what end users are wanting. Underpinning the framework is what we call the Evaluative Quality Assurance Framework, which is our quality assurance system, and it is a fully integrated system, so all component parts of the quality assurance system support and work with the other component parts to keep it a strong system for ourselves. And this is one of the strengths of our framework, so it is actually very important reputationally that we maintain it. It's also very important for New Zealand because our qualifications and our institutions are not necessarily well known internationally, and our very strongest ones are often not so well known internationally. So it's very important that the system connects. So here's our holistic system. So a very important part of it is actually entry to it. So we are responsible for allowing private institutions to be registered. They cannot deliver education on the framework without being registered. They also cannot achieve funding or from the government or enrol international students. We also approve qualifications and the programs that lead to those qualifications and accredit the providers. We make a number of other front-end approvals, including a code of pastoral care for international students. All qualifications and all learning, we have training schemes and standards as well separately, must be quality assured in order to achieve public funding or to enrol international students. A large number of providers, around 100, do not enrol international students or achieve public funding, but still register in order to have people gain qualifications on our framework. They're mostly corporates and not-for-profits, and the first aid sector. So they're particular areas where being on our framework is important. We have processes for maintaining quality, monitoring our degrees, and which we do annually for the degrees we approve until organisations become self-monitoring, and at that point we collect their reports. We also provide consistency of programs against the graduate outcome of the qualification. With our new qualifications, the New Zealand qualifications, we will have consistency reviews when a certain number of graduates have graduated, so that all organisations doing programs towards those are consistent. Because you can have a program done on job by industry training alongside a program in an institution that both lead to the same New Zealand qualification. So it's important we have consistency. We also have an evaluative approach once every 4 years of every tertiary organisation, which does involve a panel visit and an assessment. All these processes are based on self-assessment by the organisation that's delivering the education, and they are required to provide the evidence to us to satisfy us for our quality assurance. The external evaluative reviews are holistic, and they vary enormously because the sector is very, very diverse, and some organisations are very small and some are very large. But, and this quality assurance permeates the whole system, and most of the organisations are in the vet space. And it's actually a very important part of maintaining quality for us. We give grades to the organisations after the evaluative reviews. They're either good, which is category 2, excellent, category 1, or we're not yet confident, and that's category 3, or not confident, category 4. There are over 500, well, nearly 600 organisations assessed. There are only at the moment 2 category 4s and 25 category 3s. Category 4s are not allowed to do very much, and they have to get better very fast or be deregistered. Category 3s also have sanctions. So it's very important to us that everybody's on that. We also have an Indigenous knowledge component to the framework as well, but I won't take long on that because I do want to just cover how we make global connections and give 3 examples before we wrap up of how we incorporate transnational qualifications in the work we do. So City and Guilds, and I know you're here, we incorporate City and Guilds qualifications into one of our level 5 New Zealand diplomas, and students who gain that diploma also gain 2 City and Guilds qualifications at the same time. We do this by making sure that the outcomes required for the international qualifications are also met alongside our domestic ones, and by working with the organisations delivering the education or with the qualification developer, we can usually ensure that that's the case. Another example is international seafaring, where another level 5 qualification, this time a certificate, meets international maritime requirements, and that has been built into the process. This time we worked really strongly with the regulator to make sure that we met the regulatory requirements, which are international. International shipping and seafaring is important in New Zealand as a maritime nation. And a technician one with the International Engineering Alliance and the Dublin standards, I think this one relates to. And this is a diploma in civil engineering and how we meet that. So to conclude, this is part of our future. We're here, really I'm enjoying very much being here to hear how Europe is handling many of the same challenges. I think we have the same challenges, and we've all got opportunities to work towards meeting them. So thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And now we will move quickly to our last presentation by Gerald Till. Gerald, he works in the National Skills Qualification Framework now as a consultant with the Asian Development Bank. So he will tell us about the challenges that India is facing.
Good morning, everybody. George told me to hurry up. I will try to do that as much as I can. But one thing I have to mention, yesterday Lucas criticized me as for not appearing as a typical representative of India. Yes, I have to admit I couldn't change that within the 1 year I now worked in Delhi, and success has not been achieved anyway. What I want to say is, I'm also working, yes, now in the framework of the National Skills Development Agency. I have still to look at the whole processes from outside, yes, and I can't really claim that I understand all the things going on in this area in India. I got some consolation from colleagues that told me they, also being Indians, they also don't know it exactly, yes. Anyway, that's a necessary remark at the very beginning. I will start with some starting points, yes. The first thing is a vision, yes. Skill development is critical for achieving faster and so on. You can read it yourself, and it looks very good, doesn't it? So you can see that the Indians feel that they should have also some mission for, not only for India, but outside of India. Next thing are objectives of the reform. You will find all the things you will also find in other areas of the world, yes. But what might be interesting is to have a look on this enable effective coordination between different ministries, the center and the states and public and private providers. This is a real challenge in this country. I have to mention that we have totally different dimension as we are used to look at in Europe. The biggest, the largest state of India, which would in our countries be a region, yes, is Uttar Pradesh, and there live 200 million people. That's more than in Brazil. It's only to let you know that the dimensions are totally different, and expectations has also to be very different. Priority areas. First thing, it's very important. Since over 90% of India's labor force is engaged in the non-formal sector, 90%, yes. The most important challenge would be to reach out to this sector. This means 10% of the economy is what we call formal, yes. It's a totally different situation as we are used to deal with in our countries. The main concept, yes, which was chosen to solve the arising problem was to set up a national skills qualification framework. A national skills qualification framework that is a framework as we are used to talk about as also in Europe with regard to EQF and also in other areas of the world, yes. This is the main concept, and it is intended to make all Indian qualifications NSQF compliant, which includes a lot, yes. It doesn't only include leveling, it also includes, yes, to make curricula, understanding of trainers, assessment, and all these elements we are used to talk about all the time, yes, to make NSQF compliant. And I can assure you they are not yet at this stage. And what is also important, yes, to know that all these objectives shall be achieved up to the end of 2018, and that otherwise, if a qualification is not compliant, public funding will not be delivered. Okay, the next thing, there are a lot of institutional attempts to solve the problem. At first, I want shortly to talk about this NSQF. If you look at the levels, it are 10 levels, yes? If you look at the domain, a closer look at these domains shows you that it is inspired by the European qualification framework. Professional knowledge, that's the knowledge category, more or less. Professional skills, that's our skills category. And responsibility, that is more or less an equivalent for competence. Then you have also the core skills, which are missing in the European qualification framework, but because it's understood that this already exists. I only tell you that in India, a lot of people are illiterate. In many states, you have a high percentage of illiteracy, yes? And if a state like Uttarakhand says we have 80%, then they are proud of it. Only to tell you that this is not the same situation as in our countries. So these things are listed, yes, to be as a precondition for successful participation in training. And the last thing is process required. This is more or less a summary of the whole categories. The institutional approaches are, I wouldn't say numerous, that would be too much. But anyway, there are various approaches to deal with these issues. The first thing is the setup of so-called state skill development missions. State skill development missions are, let me say, this is, as India is a federative country, they are dealing with these issues at state level. State is region, yes, in our understanding. And they are responsible for implementing the reform at this level. And I can assure you there are big differences between every state. What does not mean that the state would say, okay, this is not our right. They have a lot of rights in the area of education and vet. So the next thing is to set up a Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, which happened in 2014. The skill development missions has already started much earlier. And in 2014, this new ministry was set up. By the way, there are two other ministries also dealing with skills. This is the Ministry for Human Resources and the Ministry of Labor. And there are still other ministries. You have sector-oriented. For example, the Ministry for Tourism is also responsible for some qualification in the tourism sector. So we have a lot of these things, yes, and a lot of division of labor among ministries. Then you have, under these new ministries, you have the National Skill Development Agency. That is the agency I'm working for. I'm involved in the capacity building of this agency. And you have also a National Skill Development Committee, which is a public-private partnership, including so-called sector skill councils, oriented to the Anglo-Saxon model. Well, I say oriented, I wouldn't say it's the same. So these sector skill councils, they are dealing with a lot of different sectors and delivering qualifications. And then you have, among these national skills development agencies are a lot of other things which appear only as a small piece, but I tell you something which will be of big interest for you. There's is planned to set up an institute or national skills research division. which is something comparable to CEDIFOP, I would say, yes. And this is planned under this NSTA. So you will afterwards see how many tasks they want to fulfill in the next years. First, something about the SSTMs. I won't want to go into detail. I only want to show you what the problems are. And as I have to deal with some of these states, they are telling us frankly, we don't have the personnel. We don't have the money. The National Skills Development Mission, this is an equivalent for that at the central level, was created now in July. The NSTA, I don't want to go into detail because it's not so much time left, has a lot of these tasks to fulfill. This is the public-private partnership. And these are the sector skill councils. Okay. So now, shortly, something about that. I'm involved in these capacity building activities. You have the problem, yes, that you always, that situation is very quickly changing, yes, in terms of the environment of work. These things are sensible in my opinion. Training of consultants working on behalf of NSTA. You need multipliers, otherwise all these tasks can't be fulfilled. And they have to be aware of all these challenges. They have to know that, have to inform people that NSTA, NSQF compliance does not only mean, yes, leveling or something more, that a lot of things have to be changed. What about international collaboration from this point of view? Of course, international collaboration is something which is intended by the Indian government. And of course, they mention that officially, and it is of course, it's even something which is a part of their policies, that they want to make their people able to work outside of India. A lot of people leave India and they want to give them a qualification, yes, to work in other countries. And they are aware of the necessary conditions, yes, to be created. And there is also an understanding that there must be a relationship between the NSQF and other qualification frameworks. Also between to the EQF, that is intended, and this is about still a pending process, and the official memorandum of understanding does not yet exist. And what is also, of course, has to be seen, there are a lot of bilateral activities, yes, the Indian government is cultivating. For example, some weeks ago, Brigitte Bouquet visited us in Delhi, and because she is representative of CNCP, and they have a memorandum of understanding with the National Skills Development Agency. But I don't want only to mention these, let me see, officially accepted or officially intended initiatives for international collaboration. The subject of our conference is internationalization, globalization. But globalization does not only take place, let me say, at an official basis. We have to understand that these processes are often going on without a specific driver conscious of that. For example, in India, it's very clear, India having been a British colony, the tradition, the British educational tradition plays a big role still. Also these marking systems, yes, modularization approaches are very common there. Also the kind of training with national occupational standards. By the way, you can find all different approaches which you find in Europe, also in India. It is not said that the VAT is very uniform in terms of the categories used, yes. But of course it is common marking systems and also national occupational standards, putting them together to qualification packages. And this, to a certain extent, is not identical, it reminds to the Anglo-Saxon approaches. The other thing is, the other foreign approaches are used by big enterprises, globally working enterprises situated in India. All the big shots we'll find there in the automotive industry, IT and whatever. And they, of course, use their own approaches. I would say they use the so-called island solutions sometimes. If they are not happy with the existing national system, or the national approaches, they want to implement their own approaches. Within their enterprises, that is possible. It's no problem, yes, to do that. I know the same which happens in other countries of Asia, just in Southeast Asia, some, for example, Japanese firms, that they use this approach. They train them their own way. This also happens in India. So, just shortly to talk about the challenges on the reform, challenges of the reform. You can already feel it, what I now will mention. There is no general skills policy strategy in terms of the required human and financial resources. That is the biggest challenge. If you don't know how to finance that at state level, at central level, there is money. It's not a problem that money is not available, yes? But if it is not clarified how it will be used within the next year, then it's a problem. Also, the awareness of stakeholders is very different. Can't say that it's so widespread all over the country for all the responsible institutions. The changes of responsibilities are mostly inspired by, let me say, some bureaucratic convenience. Only shortly to mention, within 1 year, there were 4 different DGs, Director Generals, working for NSDA. This is mostly inspired, let me say, by some reforms within the government as such, and it is not prepared long before. This also creates problems. And what is also a problem, the misunderstanding that if business is supported, business isn't supported by vocational policy, of course, everywhere. And industry needs are accepted. But one has to make a difference between saying immediate profit or a regulatory policy which creates conditions for further business in the future. And this is also a battlefield in India. The future, only shortly, have a look at it. You can see all these implications of the reform for what I call the element of the skilling process. If this is redesigned, yes, then the reform has a chance. I'm not able to say within which time frame this will be possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. What we note is also that some of those challenges are shared by us as well, by some European countries. You refer to stakeholders, engagement. I don't want to keep you any longer. You may have your coffee break and maybe address some of the questions to the speakers during the coffee break. I see we have lost already some. I then allow you to go for your break and maybe return in 20 minutes to continue with a more lively panel discussion where your involvement also will be needed.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are slowly moving towards the end of this conference on the impact of globalization on VET. I think what we learned over the last 2 days is that this impact is going to be there because there are a lot of challenges, a lot of evolutions, trends. And just to give an example, if you remember the presentation that was delivered yesterday by Cisco on how IT is going to change our lives, we're only at the beginning of this, so this impact is going to be there, right? So we thought it would be useful to have a session where we could discuss on joining forces to develop VET for this globalized economy. Now, if you talk joining forces, obviously, you're talking about bringing partners that each have their interest, obviously, bringing them together and have this exchange. So that is why we have this session as a kind of a panel debate, where we try to bring together a couple of those actors. Well, a couple of those actors, that has resulted in this basically huge panel we have here. You see the different persons sitting here. I have the list because I know that the cards probably at the back of the room are a bit less easy to read. So I will just say who we have here. We have Thomas Meyer, representing basically the employer's perspective. Thomas, can you raise your hand so that people know where you are sitting in the panel? Okay, great, thank you, Thomas. We have Agnès Romand, representing basically the union perspective. Agnès, yeah? And I have to apologize to Agnès because I managed, it's the one thing I had to prepare for today, and I wrote UTEC, and it should have been ETUC, okay? But it's still the same Agnès, okay? So then we have Mario Spataforo, great. He's representing the banking sector, right? We are so glad to have somebody from Hong Kong here. So it's Eva Cheng from the Hong Kong Qualifications Framework Secretariat, okay, part of this panel. We have somebody representing the national governmental level, and it is Wilfried Boomgaard from the Flemish Ministry of Education and Training. We have a representation of the European Commission, DG Employment. It is Maria Todorova. And finally, obviously, we wouldn't have a complete panel without CEDEFOP, right? So we have Jens Bjornavold representing CEDEFOP. Right, so let's just kick off, and maybe let's realize that, yeah, because of this trends that we have been discussing the last day, it's very clear that there's going to be this impact, which means that some way probably these national VET systems need to open up, maybe need to accommodate to these international qualifications. But why exactly should we be doing this? Because the reasons might be different for the different actors, right? And then the question obviously is what would need to be done, what areas would need to be addressed, and how should we move on from this point onwards. So let me perhaps give the floor first to Thomas and see what the employer's perspective should be on this matter. Thomas, could you elaborate on this, please?
Okay, thank you. Well, so the question is why should national VET systems be open to international development? And I think in this context, the answer is actually clear, straightforward. I mean, what do we want? We want to have VET systems which are good. And when we speak about good VET systems, this of course means that they are responsive to skill needs. And if we have global challenges, we might as well look at global answers. And the global answers are there, namely in the form of international standards, in the form of international sectorial qualifications, developing standards, giving recommendations, etc. And I found this conference actually very interesting because for the first day yesterday, we actually took it for granted that these standards are here. We discussed in the workshops on how they could be integrated, what value they have, what benefits they have. And in this morning's discussion on the very international perspective with New Zealand, Australia, and India being present, I came to the conclusion, well, this is not something which we can take for granted. Actually, this is something which we have to also nurture and develop at the international level. So what we need is to have, so to say, a global, international, and also, of course, European arena where we can discuss such developments. But for the time being, since this second topic is actually more complicated and would, lead me, I don't know, to speak for much too long, I would like to focus on the second part, namely to take it for granted that we have international qualifications, that we have international sectorial qualifications being active in this field, offering answers to such global challenges. The question, therefore, is how to bring this to the ground, how to bring this to the ground in terms of how can we actually incorporate this into our national systems. What do countries need to do in order to gain, in order to use the benefits and to bring in the benefits of these developments into the national systems. And of course, I mean, the first answer to it, and this is in my view only a theoretical one, of course, national vet systems could just ignore it and just could say, well, welders or, I don't know, banking, do whatever you want. We do our things and you do your thing, and we won't cross our paths. I would say, and to me this is very clear, this would be completely the wrong answer. As I said, countries should be open, countries should say, try to gain from the experience that is there at the international level. So when I look at the subtitle of today's conference on the challenges and opportunities, I see very much the opportunity part here. That there is something out there and we should use it. And the question now is how to bring this to the ground. And I would like to mention in this context at least, well, I would like to mention two possible ways. One is to take the international standards, to take the international sectorial qualifications and put them into the national qualification frameworks. In many cases they are standalone qualifications, so I think the least that we can do at member states level is to have open qualification frameworks where there's room for such non-formal, as we call them in the EU jargon now, for non-formal qualifications, meaning qualifications which are not based on national legislation, but which are either based, so to say, out of national sectorial organizations, or in our case here, international sectorial qualifications. So I think it is necessary, it is good for national qualification frameworks to be open for also non-formal qualifications, and in this case, international non-formal qualifications. And the second way of accommodating these international developments would then be, of course, to integrate the international qualifications into the national vet systems, into the national qualification systems. And this is, of course, not very straightforward. Actually, both cases are not very straightforward, but because we have to be aware that both a national vet system but also a national qualification framework are both public goods, public things. And so I think the answer every country has to come up with is to ask the question, and of course also to answer it. So what kind of governance mechanisms are needed in order to ensure that? Who has to decide what, and actually who do you have to involve at national level to make sure that you get good things from the international level and include them either into your national qualification framework, or even better, to include them into your national standards on vet qualifications. And being an employer representative, of course, I would like to conclude with this has to be together with social partners. Yeah. It is not enough for a civil servant, however intelligent such a person might be, to decide this on his own in his little room, but you need governance structures involving employers, involving, of course, also trade unions, saying that social partners at national level will have to play an important role in deciding, on such issues. So, yeah. Okay,
very interesting. Very well. Thank you. So basically, what you're saying is, Fed systems should open up. So that's one message, and then you propose basically two different mechanisms. It could be either the Fed as it is nowadays, a layer on top of that, or integration. Now obviously that's from the perspective of the employers, but for the time being, Fed is still a national competence, right? So perhaps we need to listen a bit to the perspective of the local government. So maybe, Mr. Baumgart, you could then comment on how you would be looking from your perspective at this same problem or issue or challenge.
Thank you. Indeed, starting from the what Thomas has said. I think it's easy to react now from the national perspective. So as a member state of European Union, first I want to start with the term vocational education and training. I think it's very important to make a difference between this A and this T. So vocational education is a public good. I think all member states in Europe are agreeing on that. While on the vocational training side, we can say it's moving fast to a service market, etc. But education is the responsibility of national authorities. But from that responsibility, I fully agree we should open up our national qualification frameworks. So I see two purposes from national perspective. We have the mobility perspective. The national government should support the mobility in Europe and globally. And it could be helpful to open our frameworks, our national qualification frameworks, to make visible the position of these standalone international qualifications. That's one purpose. But even more important, because we have seen that the mobility is still low, thinking about the whole population of all countries, I think it's even more important, and I heard the perfect term from Australia and New Zealand, to incorporate international qualification standards within our VET content, and with the objective to renew the content of the VET systems. Of course, this should be done in a dialogue. So another responsibility for the national governments is to offer platforms to make this dialogue possible. And I see two dimensions. In many countries we have already the social dialogue, so we have a dialogue between labor market actors and education. But now we should add this international dimension. And from the Belgian perspective, it's very clear. If it's about vocational-oriented programs, either education or training, it's up to the sectors to decide on the content, let's say, to give us the information. And then finally, it came out of workshops and even from the good practices in the other sides of the world. If we are working together, it should be about core competences, core skills. I don't think it's a good idea to have full harmonization or whatever, because we need also this flexibility to adapt to local regional needs. And I think the Australian and New Zealand approach was very good in that perspective, working together on core business, on core competence, leaving room, flexibility to local needs, regional needs, national needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ludwig. You mentioned basically this need for dialogue, so probably the creation of platforms with the social partners at the national level, etc. Perhaps if you look at the complexity of the problem or the issue at hand, the challenge, it's clear that probably we might need lots of ways to continuously accommodate to the changes in the environment, right? So maybe we could talk a little bit of feedback loops that might be needed or not. This is something where Mr. Bjornevold could have a view on or share his view with us.
Thank you very much. I think I will start by saying, why are we doing this? I think the point mentioned both by Thomas and by Wilfried, in a way, the international, so to say, standards or qualifications or, so to say, inspiration, it's very important for the review and the renewal of national qualifications. I think that is very important, and that is probably becoming more important. CEDEFOP has actually been doing some work on that. What we have been doing is to look at what we call the feedback loops between the education training system and the employment sector. That means social partners, employers, trade unions, but also how the kind of experiences from particular qualifications are sort of meeting the requirements and the demands of the labor market. I mean, what we see is, of course, that this feedback loop in many countries is imperfect. You have breaks in this feedback loop, so that the kind of labor market intelligence doesn't reach the education training system, the experiences of education training systems in terms of assessing persons do not reach the labor market. So this loop is not working as well as it should. And I think we are now also then moving into studies where we are looking at this feedback loop, how it is also working in relation to learning outcomes, how the learning outcomes are being defined, but also how the learning outcomes are being redefined and renewed. So this is our kind of important insights. But I think what we need to add to this is an understanding of how the labor market information and intelligence on international standards, international the influences are taken aboard. Because what we see is that if we compare different sectors, different countries, there are very different the attitudes to this. Some countries, some sectors are very, very much looking into these kind of international experiences, standards, are in a way open to it. Other sectors, other countries are not. And I think that is a problem, because you see then a difference between countries. So I think from our point of view, it's important to use this kind of conceptual approach of a feedback loop where you see the relationship between education training and the labor market in a very systematic way, and try to see, well, how does this continuous flow of information, exchange of information between the stakeholders, is it interrupted? Is it continuous? How does it take aboard this information and intelligence on international standards? I think that is important. We are now in the next, actually now starting a project where we will compare 10 qualifications in Europe, in European countries, and hopefully also outside Europe, to see how this feedback loop, this renewal, review of qualifications is actually taking place. And that will also give us an opportunity to look on our international standards, international, influences taken systematically aboard, or is this differing very much between different sectors and different countries? So that is a very important focus for us, and I think it relates to what both Wilfred and Thomas has been saying. Thank you.
Thank you. So you're mentioning basically this feedback loops as a mechanism to continuously basically be in touch with evolutions, to have this flow of information streaming, basically, right? So that relates probably to the content. So what is maybe also the relevance of what would be included in this training? Now, content is one aspect, but as we've noted this morning, several of the speakers mentioned in their presentations quality assurance. So isn't there a point to be made on quality assurance in all this? Perhaps this is a question to Mario Spataro.
Okay, thank you very much, and I would like to congratulate first of all with our friends of CEDEFOP for this wonderful meeting. This is, and then the conclusion. This is what I like to do. And the question is joint forces to develop that for a globalized economy. Okay, joint forces, what is the meaning for me? Joint forces means to have the clear idea of interconnection of a market, products and services, and then we are able to use a new technologies. We have to think about cloud computing, big data, social networking. We have to look forward in this way, first of all. Second, with a lot of speakers spoke about innovation, flexibility, autonomy and responsibility. How is possible in the world to have a common understanding of this? I totally agree that we have to look in the VET, means European Professional Qualification, by sector, because I'm representing the bank and financial sector. It's clear that worldwide we have the common understanding. Then I have to speak with my colleague in Asia or in India or in Australia. We can understand. We have the similar, and then we have the similar also organizational structure. Because, for example, in the banking sector, now more and more we are the kind of a smart working. Then the qualification, we have to adapt the qualification also to the the new organizational structure. Then our suggestion is to have a new approach to quality assurance. Plan, what is plan? Motivate people and mobilize resources. Do, appreciate and esteem engagement of staff and stakeholders. Third, check, reflect and discuss perceptions of equality with the staff and the shareholders, stakeholders. Fourth, act, inform and inspire for appropriate improvements. Now, this is a merry cycle for us. And then the suggestion is the relevance of the sector, and then to apply this new approach to quality assurance and to share experience in this sector by sector.
So you would organize this on a sector basis, basically?
Yes, absolutely yes. And then we can find because we need step by step, because the time is running. So then only if we speak with other people of my sector, because the automobile sector or chemical sector are different from the banking sector. Then my hope at is, and then there will be the second part in invitation to CEDEFOP to help us in quality assurance sector. This is the idea, to define a framework for sector by sector. Of course, there is a common understanding. The umbrella of quality assurance is always the same, but some particularly indicators for sector by sector in applying quality assurance.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we heard basically 4 different speakers, each bringing his or her own vision on this, or position on this. Perhaps can we see if other panel members would like to intervene at this stage? If not, perhaps there are questions from the audience. Are there any questions you have with respect to what has been discussed so far? This is your moment. No questions? Yes, please. Can you state who you are, please? Yes.
Yes, I'm Mustafa Transmister from Norway, and I have a question for Jens Bjørnavold. You stated that feedback loops between the social partners in vocational education and training doesn't work enough. But I'm not sure if you told whether you regard it as a structural problem or what else.
Would this be a question for who, please?
For Jens Bjørnavold.
Okay.
I think I didn't get the final part of your question, whether it's a structural problem or what was the...
Or what?
That's very open, thank you. It's partly a structural problem. If you look at, we did quite a big study on that a couple of years ago, looking at this feedback loop and how the institutional structurally are set up, and you see that it's partly a structural problem in the choices of the countries on how they organize this. Of course, that has an impact. But I think also it is about the content, and I think this is something we want to look at now by going into the learning outcomes, the content of the qualifications and how these are being reviewed and renewed and so to say being changed or in this feedback loop. So I mean that is why we want to move from the structure into the content to see, well, can we actually observe how content is taken aboard and how it is reviewed, renewed in this feedback loop I'm speaking of. So I think we want to go way beyond the structures and also into the content. And of course that also brings us very close to the standards and the international, to say, experiences and possible things to take into account.
Thank you. Is this a good answer to you? I think I remember your face from Twitter. You have been a very active Twitterer during this conference, right? Which is good. There's no problem with that, right? Which brings me probably to, I've been receiving a paper with some of the Twitter thoughts that have been shared on Twitter, let's say. And apparently several people think that what Thomas Meyer said on, or that national qualification framework should be more open to include international qualifications. It seems that several people agree with that. Maybe we have somebody here in the room who made a statement like this, who would like to make this point personally? No? Twitter is not really anonymous, but still different than taking a microphone in direct conversation? No? Who else has been twittering and with respect to this panel conversation? I know some of you have. That's okay. It's not a problem. Good. Are there any other questions from the audience at this stage? Yes, please.
I'd just like to make a general reflection on joining forces to develop VAT for a globalized economy and make a connection to the presentation that was made by Boren from UNESCO, where they clearly state that they are taking a new vision with a rights perspective. And I think this could be very valid relating to EQFs, where a right perspective with a very strong basis in the Charter on Fundamental Rights could be reflected, and something that I haven't seen so far.
Is that a question to a specific panel member or just a
Well, maybe Maria, perhaps, but it's not a question, it's more a remark and something to keep in mind, food for thought.
Okay, Maria, you feel like responding to this?
I don't think that I can say something more than this, but I can just confirm that also we work together with UNESCO in this field, and we are checking what is available and where can we make progress together. So this is, for example, one of the fields where the European Commission works in cooperation also with international organizations and stakeholders.
Okay. Is there any other panel member that feels like responding to this? Okay.
Perhaps there will be some time to come back on it, but to have a quick reaction on that issue is that talking about quality assurance, it was very interesting in workshop 2 to hear from the Portuguese lady from ISQ that a lot of international providers of qualification organizations, they get entrance in national systems because they are very good in marketing, in branding, in promoting their service or their ideas, their training programs, and they are lacking quality. And so one of the responsibilities and tasks of national governments is to ensure that there is what we called also in different workshops, the consumer protection. So if you have to pay a lot of money to follow an educational training program, that at least there is some quality, and that you have value when you reach this certificate, you have the certificate that you can enter a job. And of course, it's not to the governments to regulate market of training programs, but at the end it will be the citizens calling to the government and saying it's not correct, there is a provider with false programs, fraudulent certificates and so on. So it's a really responsibility for national governments. Human rights, consumer protection.
Thank you, Wilfried. Maybe this is a good point to move on. Oh, I see we still have a question here. Great.
It's not a question, it's more reflection on what Thomas and Jens have said regarding the governance and the feedback loop. Obviously, the governance matter is very important. It is complex at the national level. And the fact that the feedback loop is sometimes broken or there is an issue regarding that means that there is a need for reinforcing the governance at the national level. It is also important, for example, at continental or at the European. But when we put it at the global level, the question becomes even much more complex. What governance system we are talking about? Who are the stakeholders? Part of the discussion is about the UN organization, but that's not sufficient, and we know very well that that's not sufficient, and we need new platforms. We need platforms that are more open, that can bring the different stakeholders around the table, not getting them, I would say, blocked into the bureaucracy, but in engaging in dialogue. And I don't think that platform exists. We are trying to set that platform around the work on world reference levels, but that's not sufficient. It requires more boosting. It requires maybe even different platforms that can then connect to each other. I think the issue of governance is very important, and we have to take that very seriously in our work.
Perfect. you're basically giving me the perfect bridge to the second part of this panel discussion, where we indeed would like to shift the focus of the discussion more on the different actors involved and different level. So indeed we have this national level, which we can't forget about, that's for sure. Then there is Europe, then there is beyond Europe, right? So, and what kind of governance would we be talking about, and how can we take care of this? So shall we first put the emphasis or the focus a bit on the national level? Why not listen to the different partners involved in this dialogue, and perhaps give the to you, Yes, Romo? How would you describe your position on that side?
Yes, thank you very much. It was a very good link to this second part of the panel, highlighting the reinforcing the governance structures, because we listened to very interesting examples about international qualifications, and I just would like to highlight that concerning governance, and among the examples we saw top-down approach, and we need also bottom-up approach. But let's go back to the top-down approach. For example, in multinational companies. It's fully understandable that the multinational companies, Microsoft, Cisco, automobile companies, food companies, they have the recent innovations, the recent knowledge of the production, and they would like to set up their standards. They are establishing international qualifications. It is fully understandable that they would like to protect what they already achieved. But what I was missing during this conference is the involvement of the workers. As you know, in 1994, there was a directive of the European Works Councils, which means that multinational companies have to invite the workers minimum once per year. If the companies have minimum 150 workers per country, of minimum 2 countries of the European Union, they have to invite the trade union representatives to discuss about strategies on the enterprise. And what is very interesting that this directive also lays down the compulsory training for the workers. In a previous conference, I mentioned a very interesting statistics, a survey. In 2012, a Spanish survey among workers and employers was done. This is the famous Detecta survey. They asked more than 300 companies and thousands of workers about the training needs. And what was interesting to see that the workers were much more interested in the general picture of the whole industry, the industrial developments, technological developments, while the employers were more interested in the health and safety issues in the workplace and the work be done at that moment in the workplace. So what it shows that if we provide more support to the workers and more role to the workers in the works councils at multinational level to discuss with the companies about international qualifications, also not only linked to initial training, but also to continuous training, that would really enhance these international qualifications and reinforce the governance. The other issue is the bottom-up approach. Of course, when the multinational companies and other actors define the international qualifications, we cannot really ignore that there are national VAT systems, and indeed what Wilfried said, we have to protect them because they were coming from very important historical reasons, and they are governed and should be governed in cooperation with social partners and the governments. But there are interesting bottom-up approaches coming from workers and employers organizations, and these are the European level sectoral skills councils. In 2011-2012, many of them sat together representing different professions, for example, construction sector, textile sector, etc. And they try to define whether they would like to define European level core curriculum or minimum skills requirements in their sector. Interestingly, around 14 or 15 of them decided not. They don't want it because it's national competence and they can deal with it at national level. And concerning the recognition from country to country, it can be solved in another way. Other sectors, however, for example, the hairdressing sector established a 3-level European level qualification framework for them in order to better recognize the hairdressing diplomas in Europe. But some sectors are still continuing. The textile, automotive and construction sector, they still consider it important to lay down the core curricula in their professions. So even when it will be ready, it's very important to involve then the governments, national governments, and the national social partners, because we still have to protect these professions, and it's essential that it is be done with the employers, workers, and the government. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So you've been exploring on this bottom-up approach, among other things. Let's take a look at the perspective from employers. We have an example of the banking sector in Italy. So could you perhaps comment on how this governance issue was taken care of in that particular case?
Okay, thank you. Banking and financial sector. First of all, we have an European association built up in 91, means that are 25 years, and we are 40 countries, then 40 members, but not only European. What we reach in these 10 years, or more than the last 10 years. First of all, Mariola presented yesterday, now we have EEE. It's an accreditation system for qualification in the financial services sector. Then, from now on, we have something concrete. How to define, EEE means, as Mariola said yesterday, is in line with the EQF, ECAVET, and EasyVet. In particular, we focus, and now we have to focus our attention in quality assurance. Quality assurance, as we run several projects, we began, the first one was about quality assurance and learning organization, because we have to look in the future. Quality assurance is a general terms, and the learning organization, because when Agnes said trade unions, I totally agree with her. We have to be able to have some tools, instruments, able for managing in a better way the companies, but the companies should be also learning organized, otherwise.
And do you have these instruments in the banking sector?
Yes, of course,
okay.
In the banking sector. Second, we define the guidelines and some toolkit instruments how to apply the quality assurance in the banking sector. This is already concrete, defined. Then we went also on. And then we say what we need. We need make indicators more usable for financial services sector. We have the 10, but we need. Second, support the qualification of the trainers. Third one, manage quality gap in ICT e-learning, and promote also work-based learning. But in the last project, what we did? A transfer of innovation, because in one of our members in the Netherlands, in the banking sector, was something concrete already applied. Then what do you see? Why not to try to transfer the results of this quality assurance in other countries? And then we decide to have in Slovakia, in Spain, in Portugal, and in Italy, in 2 banks, just to be concrete. Then, just to conclude, what is the main recommendation? First of all, engage the management in order to have a concrete support in designing and implementing the system. Then we need to have an agreement with the top level. Second is to establish a responsible position for quality assurance management, a person. Then we have to disseminate the culture of quality and share experiences among our partners in Europe. And then, at the end, motivate and engage individuals and other organizations to invest for a better quality assurance of that.
Yeah. So we hear about a very clear example within the banking sector. We had the voice of the trade unions. Well, the third social partner obviously is the government itself. So what would be the take of the government on this governance issue? Wilfried, this is perhaps a question for you.
Yes. I first want to react on what has been said until now. So, regarding the role that national governments, but also national agencies could play, I repeat, is to create platforms. And indeed, we need really platforms for cooperation, private-public cooperation, international cooperation. And I think the development and further implementation of national qualification frameworks are creating a momentum in all member states to bring together people, sectors, education providers. But there is one problem, and we have seen it during this conference. The member states are in different stage of development, so of course we should respect that. And last but not least, and I'm not afraid for saying that, so as we heard, in India there is a lack of capacity, there is a need for capacity building. It still is in all countries. And in both cases, so for the international cooperation and within our member states to have more capacity building, I think European agencies can help us. So I think CDFOP is in a good position to help us in capacity building, knowledge building, but also to translate in the double sense of the word what's happening in UNESCO and so on to the lower level. Then two other things very shortly. As Australia has shown, we have also the responsibility to create the legal basis to make this, to facilitate this cooperation and this dialogue. Of course, in member states with social dialogue, there is already a fundament. But then I come to the most important thing I would add to the discussion in this conference, and it's very important. It's about politics. So not policy, but politics. The problem is, we all know, political parties, governments, they are also rapidly changing and so on, even more quickly sometimes than the market. And we need stability, continuity. And I think then it's important to have stable agencies. And I agree also with UNESCO, we need the political leaders. And I take the opportunity to refer to my minister, Flemish Minister Krevits. So the migration refugee issue, she took this opportunity last week, I think, to call UNESCO to go for this global recognition convention. So I think there are opportunities, and if we have political support, then we can move further on a lower level, and then in a non-bureaucratic way, perhaps, I hope so. And then to finalize, if we are successful in this cooperation, then we can share funds. And then to come back to the sector skills councils, I think there were two problems. The procedure was perhaps too bureaucratic to build it up. And secondly, if the plan was to have common core curricula, I think this was too ambitious. We should focus on common core occupational standards. This is the core business for the sectors. And then we can move on further with the national governments to translate to education and training programs. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Wilfried, for highlighting the different roles that could be taken up at the national level in creating the legal basis, the creation of the platforms. Then you highlighted the political factor that can't be dismissed, obviously, and for sharing with us the need for this capacity building, even within Europe at several national or in several national states, so to speak. Thomas, I saw your hand. Could you, but please be short.
Just two sentences on
Thank you.
Actually Wilfried's last sentence, namely on this core, how did you call it?
Please speak in the microphone.
Core profiles, occupational core profiles. Yes, in principle, yes, and it's, I think at this point, very important also again bring back the governance issue, because such occupational core profiles would then make sense if they are developed bottom up by sectors. No? And if they are developed at international sectorial level, I mean, even better. But of course, the national governance systems then have to be open, you know, to let them in. And since Agnes mentioned the hairdressers, I mean, this is a perfect example where there is a standard being agreed between employers and employees at European Union, and the effect at national level is a very tiny one. Yeah? It is maybe politics. Yeah, so I'm saying we know what to do, but the the challenge now is, you know, to create the governance issues which are governance structures and the readiness at national level to allow that to come in, you know. And this, in my view, has a lot to do with the willingness, and I talked about this yesterday in the workshop already, the willingness also by the state, by authorities, to delegate authority to such structures.
Okay. Now we've been exploring this at the national level, so to speak, but let's perhaps move the discussion now to the European level and see what Europe can do and what specifically the role of the European Commission in all this could be. So Maria, could you share with us your European insights on this? Yes.
Yeah. First of all, I wanted to say that actually we sit here in a perfect company, having representatives of the main European stakeholders, the trade unions, the representatives of the employers, and then the national governments, and also the Commission. And also, actually, these are the main stakeholders forming this European cooperation in VET. With this, I would like to give the example that this is already a shared responsibility, a shared commitment. It started many years ago in Europe, and it has been enhanced since the year 2002 through the so-called Copenhagen process. This is also for our international guests to let them know that such a thing exists. And actually, within this process of enhanced cooperation in VET, all those stakeholders sitting here around this table, they commit themselves on formulating objectives and priorities in VET, modernizing reforms and modernization and reforms in VET, and also working on common tools, initiatives, and also principles. So last time they met all together, including also representatives of VET providers and even candidate countries in June this year, 2015. And I can say that also in their commitment from Riga during the Latvian presidency, they actually recognized also the importance of the impact of globalization and the responsiveness of VET, including with regard to the VET qualifications. So again, I'm referring to all this cooperation just to highlight that we don't have same way as in the member states. We don't have only one actor responsible, but we have a shared responsibility, and this is also shared governance in a way at European level among all those partners. What exactly we can do more? I already listened and I took notes about this very nice wording of a common shared space or arena for a better collaboration, or exploring EU arena for bringing EU experiences that encourage national changes. These are very relevant shared thoughts, and the Commission is actually already doing so. The Commission has a mandate in a couple of fields. One of this is exactly assisting member states in implementation reforms. The whole responsibility lies with the member states, but the Commission can, by gathering expertise, sharing good practice examples, supporting also policy learning, co-creating or managing such platforms over there. We can do, of course, more. We can do more in visibility, in usage, in dissemination of such examples, but this is one area. Another one area is the area which I mentioned before on common work within European tools and initiatives. On tools such as European qualification frameworks, we've been talking a lot. I would just refer to one initiative which is a responsibility of my unit dealing with VET, which is the European Alliance for Apprenticeship. Again, something linked to the topic of this conference, which could be considered, of course, if all the stakeholders agree with this, to broaden the scope of this European multi-stakeholders initiative, so to cover also countries outside of Europe. Another one area, these are the European programs, and we heard a lot about. So one wish for the future we can take on board again in cooperation with all the relevant stakeholders, because the European programs are co-managed by Commission and Member States. So if we agree, so we can also boost mobility and shape such projects for mobility in VET outside of the EU. What is existing, and we are actually addressing this this sectorial perspective through a particular program on sector skills alliances, and what Thomas and other colleagues here mentioned. Over there is a lot of work being done on such occupational standards, profiles, which can be taken on board. So far they are reference tools in a way, but they can be taken on board within the national qualifications. And last but not least, 5 years ago during the same meeting of the same stakeholders, but in Bruges, over there already the importance of broadening up this EU arena or cooperation was taken on board with creating links to a global cooperation, and the Commission actually commissioned such a study on the added value of international cooperation in developing VET with international organizations. We reinforced our cooperation there, but also bilaterally with particular countries, and I think that one of our potential partners is sitting here next to.
Thank you, Maria, for sharing with us what is already happening at the European level and the different roles Europe could play in this, on tools, on platforms, sharing, etc. You already mentioned that, yes, we have collaborations even beyond Europe. So it's not only about joining forces within Europe, we should have a few from a global perspective, and we are so glad to have Mrs. Cheng among us here. Could you perhaps, Mrs. Cheng, elaborate a bit on the example of the Hong Kong qualifications framework and how this collaboration with Europe is taking place within this project? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Stephen, giving me the opportunity to share, the Hong Kong QF and what we have done so far in development of VET qualifications in Hong Kong. Maybe before I say anything, I have to clarify that Hong Kong QF is a very local framework. Okay, Hong Kong is not a nation, so we do not have a national QF. It is a local framework serving the population of Hong Kong. And we implemented it for altogether about 8 years, and for two major purposes. One is to promote lifelong learning, and the other one is to enhance the competitiveness and capability of the local workforce. So these two major objectives is very clear and make clear to all the stakeholders. And that's why VET has at the very beginning stage is already a very important part of our Hong Kong QF framework. And in launching the VET qualification development, I would clarify, or I would say that the Hong Kong model is a collaborative model, bringing all the social partners and the stakeholders together. Like, for example, the government set the policy and provide the funding, as well as setting up the exchange forum whereby all the stakeholders could get together and exchange views and advise the government on what kind of qualification is required and the training needs and etc. And the employers and the employees, and of course including the trade association and the labor unions, are also important stakeholders for that information exchange forum. And again, the QA bodies, the accreditation authority, and the providers, all these are important stakeholders. And the government provides sufficient funding so that whoever stakeholders want to participate in the Hong Kong QF, they could be funded. So we are giving them some incentive to participate in the Hong Kong QF. But having said all this, I would consider that the VET development in the Hong Kong QF still have a lot to learn. We are still at the very, very beginning stage, and we encounter all kinds of difficulties. The governance is not an important issue. The structural communication loop maybe, and also the labor issues and different commitments of the different stakeholders is also a part of this. And so far in VET qualification development, I would generally say that we have made some significant steps. First of all, we have more and more competency-based qualifications included in our Hong Kong QF. And those competency-based qualifications are actually making references to the industry standards developed by the employers and the employees. And in addition to that, more and more companies with their in-house training they got accredited and recognized under the Hong Kong QF. And in a sense, those employees employed by the employers through their in-house training, they actually got a QF recognized qualification. And that would do them very good in terms of applying for progression of further studies or even promotion, I would say. And so far, we have about altogether 200 accredited operators have qualifications under the Hong Kong QF, and I think we have about 15% of the operators are actually from the employers, like automotive, the banking, the Citibank, and all this kind, insurance company. So this is quite a good move. And then another major mechanism under the Hong Kong QF is our recognition of prior learning. I might have shared with some of you in other conferences, but this is quite unique in Hong Kong. And we do have a very rigorous and very comprehensive RPL mechanism implemented on the industry if the industry stakeholders have a consensus on that. And so far, statistically speaking, I would say we have about 15,000 employees have already got the RPL qualifications. But the RPL qualifications could also help them in terms of further learning. But in terms of employment or promotion or salary increase, I would say this is still a labor issue. And Hong Kong is a laissez-faire economy, and so the government do not have any mandate or did not set any policy on this. And then coming back to the major theme of joining forces for this conference, and I'm very glad that I have the opportunities to attend the conference, primarily because we learned so much, based on the workshops and based on the panel discussion and all the discussion sessions. And then we realized that European Union member states, although you guys have a very advanced national QF, and we already started the collaboration with the EQF, but on the other hand, we learn, what works and what didn't work, which I hope to bring back home. And at least I got inspired by the sectoral qualifications framework. As a matter of fact, Hong Kong QF is piloting similar initiative in some industry, and banking is one of them, and others as well. But while we are focusing on the sectoral qualifications, we are not at the stage of expanding international qualifications yet, because we still need to serve the local needs for the time being. Maybe we started from the local qualification, the sectoral one, and then to the regional, because we have close relationship with our neighboring regions, including mainland China and maybe ASEAN countries as well. But for sure, international qualifications is one of the major aim for the Hong Kong QF. And having said that, Hong Kong QF is a local framework, I have to emphasize that we are very outward-looking and open for all kinds of opportunities as well. And we have established collaboration with, for example, Scotland, Ireland, and EQF, and even CEDEFOP as well, because we have the CEDEFOP people will be joining our accreditation authority and helping us to steer the WEC development and sharing the WEC information and all those kind of studies. So that's about what I could share.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us. It's a perfect illustration that this joining forces is basically taking place already at all different levels, be it national or even international, between different continents, which is great to learn here. Which brings me perhaps to the end of this panel session. And as CEDEFOP was mentioned by Mrs. Cheng, let's perhaps turn to the CEDEFOP representative we have here, Jens Bjornavold, to share with us what the position of CEDEFOP is in this, what initiatives are already being taken or being cooked up. Yes, please.
Well, I guess my colleague Lucas also will say a couple of words towards the end, but I just want to link up to this issue of sector and sector core profiles, because I think that will probably become quite important in the time ahead of us, and it's also focusing particularly what can be done, how can we join forces at European level, because I think there's been a lot of development of the European qualification framework, the national qualification frameworks, but I mean at the sectoral level it's more fragmented and perhaps not so systematically what is happening. In the keynote speech yesterday, there was a reference to a project which was carried out around 10 years ago, which is called Sustainable Professionalization, which was an initiative of the French authorities, but which involved a number of member states. What this project did was to test a model for how national qualification authorities can work together to create also European, so to say, core profiles in a way, so that you can combine, of course, the relevance to the national situation, but where you also emphasize and strengthen the European dimension in this case. This project was not taken forward. It ended up, as projects often do, they are not taken forward on a permanent basis, but perhaps it would now be time to go back and look at this kind of projects which tries to address explicitly this combination of the international, in this case the European dimension, and the national qualifications, which is important. I think it's a very, very good model, but I think if we are going ahead towards this kind of profiles, because the sustainable professionalization worked in particular sectors, if we're going to do this, the only way to achieve results is, of course, to involve the social partners, the sectoral players, in a way to also use a kind of bottom-up approach. But I think we need so that this is not ending up only in words, but we need to take initiatives, and perhaps this sectoral focus, sectoral profiles, using some of the experiences we have already in Europe, and trying to see how can we take this forward, for example, in terms of European sectoral profiles for occupations, qualifications, possibly in certain areas where cooperation is very important. And the logistics sector mentioned by, for example, Australia is a typical example where you could envisage this kind of things, and also in manufacturing sectors. So I think it's a need now to go into more concrete efforts, and CEDEFOP is certainly willing to support this work. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are reaching the very end of this conference, and certainly the end of this panel debate. So I would like to thank the panel members for their contributions in both preparing as well as delivering their contributions here during the panel. So can we have their hands for them, please? Thank you so much, which brings me to the next point, which is that I would like to hand the word to Mr. Lucas Sahilas to basically close this conference.
I think we are approaching the end, so you just have to wait for 5 more minutes. What I want to actually discuss with you, or to present to you, is our feedback, as we saw from these after this 1.5 days we had this very interesting event. And I suppose what we need is actually to take stock of all the discussions, of all the debates, and of all proposals we heard so far. Just a few points from the notes I kept during these 2 days. I believe that this is something that I also mentioned at the beginning. Globalization is here. Globalization is here to stay. And it is obviously affecting VET in multiple ways. And one of the main characteristics of this globalization is the speed of change. And as Wilfried said, I don't know if the speed is the same like the one with the political changes, but this speed should be addressed by all of us, either working on education and training or represent the other part of the labor market. So I think it is very important to address this change. And I want to go back to what Patrice Guezou mentioned yesterday, because this is very important. He said that the rate of change of the outside, when the rate of change of the outside exceeds the rate of change of the inside, then we have a problem, to put it mildly. Or, as one of the rapporteurs said in one of the workshops, either you innovate and change or die. But I don't want to close the event with these negative messages. So I will just mention points that have to do with the challenges and the opportunities we have, CEDEFOP's role, and our plans for the future. So, regarding challenges, it was obvious that one of the main issues is quality assurance. It was mentioned in all plenary sessions, working groups, even in the latest panel discussion. So, we require trust, and quality assurance is the way to go. And this is also linked to standards and qualifications. The link between them passes also through quality assurance, and also involves the necessary dialogue between labor market and education. This is obvious, and I think we have to face this challenge to make it a reality. It was also apparent that we need to focus also on transversal skills, and also to address the concept of globalization in the national context. Because through this approach we will, I suppose, enhance employability, especially among young generations. And not to forget that although, yes, educational systems, universities, businesses, schools should become more flexible, on the other hand, we should not also forget that cross-border awarding bodies or international organizations need to acknowledge the quality and standards of the national authorities. It is a game that should be played by both. There should be a balance and a discussion among these parts. Also, I want just to mention something that I think includes all that has been said in relation to challenges. This is what actually Borrell said earlier this morning. Global solutions require, we need global solutions for globalized challenges. This is very important. Now, for the opportunities, we have challenges, but we have also opportunities. I think globalization and all the issues we discussed in this conference is actually opening a way to bridge social responsibility of national authorities with the labor market and cross-border interconnectivity. And on the other hand, it is also an excellent occasion, an excellent opportunity to bring together and to improve cooperation between private and public sector, which is no longer an option, but I think it is a necessity. In this way, we could also actually have the interest of public good, we can bring the interest of public good closer to the needs of the industry. This is also another important dimension. We should also exploit a tool that we have, which is our common language. We have the learning outcomes approach, and I think this is one of the main tools that will support all these developments. And last but not least is that we should not forget the main actors that are teachers and trainers, and I think Agnes will be very happy about that. Not only her. Jens already mentioned that CEDEFOP works in this direction. We didn't start in 2012 with the publication of international qualifications. It's an ongoing work. It's the work that we are doing regarding qualifications, EQF, NQFs, learning outcomes, quality assurance, credit systems. We work on curricula assessment, validation. All this is very relevant to what we discussed today. What we can mention is that apart from what Jens already told you before, we are running these two very interesting projects that will begin in the early next year. We have two studies, one on the changing nature and role of VET. This is an ambitious 3 years project that will also address these external factors that influence vocational education and training. And also we will have a study that is exactly on the topic of this conference. That means globalization of VET. Both will start early next year, and of course you will be informed for the ongoing work and the results. We are also trying to become more extrovert as CEDEFOP. We try to promote synergies working together apart from the European Commission and our governing board that actually includes governments, employees and employers. We open doors also to the outside world. We try to improve the cooperation with UNESCO, with ILO, parallel to the existing links we have in our work with the European Training Foundation and Eurofound. And of course, we took note of the ideas that were presented today. Mario and Wilfried mentioned the issue of sectoral quality assurance or capacity building and knowledge building in relation to these issues. We take note of this, and of course, it will be part of our discussions for our way ahead. I don't want to prevent you from taking the bus to the airport, so I want just to say that it's just this event, this closing session, is also a beginning. The way ahead is long. I believe we have to, in any case, to walk this pathway together. We always do that as CEDEFOP. And that is why I hope that you enjoyed and found this event really fruitful, very interesting, and I hope with practical ideas for your work. Before closing, I want to thank all of you that managed to overcome the threat of Lufthansa and be with us, coming from all parts of Europe, and not only Europe, from all over the world. And also all the colleagues and CEDEFOP colleagues that supported in the preparation and actually doing this conference by participating as chairs, as rapporteurs, as moderators, discussants. Special thanks to the people that worked on the conceptual background of this event, to Jens, he's here, to Slava Pevec and Ernesto Villalba. And of course, additional thanks to Philippe Jourot, who is with us, and Joan Basiakou, who you had the opportunity to meet day and night outside this room. And I should not forget, of course, because the man that devoted the last months of his life in this event was George Kostakis, and I think worked really hard on this, on the success of this event. Before you leave, and before I tell you have a safe return flight to your home, you have to fill in an evaluation form. There is somewhere around an evaluation form in front of you, and you have to take the bus. The bus to the airport will leave at 1:30. So 1:30 you should be outside the building, in the entrance of the building, and that means you should start leaving around 1:20. So all the best, and I hope you have a safe trip back to your countries.